Okay. Okay, thank you. So members, we're now live to the public. So we're at item number 5 on our agenda. If I can just inform members that a paper detailing the committee membership is at page 49 of the pack. And if I could ask members to complete the contact details which were given to us and return it to the committee staff at the end of the meeting. Also, can I advise that they should contact the committee office if they are unable to attend a committee meeting or if they wish to join the meeting remotely, and this will alert the clerk in advance to any potential quorum difficulties. So move now to item number 6 on the CLAR. This refers to the Secretariat briefing paper at page 51 of the meeting pack, and I'm going to ask the clerk to speak to this item.
Okay, all members are required to register relevant financial and other interests in the Register of Members' Interests, and details of those are published on the Assembly website. But in addition to that requirement, Standing Order 69.5 states that a member who has a financial interest in any matter or a relevant interest in any matter must declare that interest before taking part in any proceedings of the Assembly relating to that matter, and proceedings of the Assembly include meetings of this committee. So as this is the first meeting of the committee, members should ensure that any financial or other interests which relate to the remit of the committee or which are likely to be relevant to a substantial part of its work are drawn to the attention of the committee. And it should be noted that failure to register and or declare an interest may be offence under Section 43 of the Northern Ireland Act 1998.
Okay, so if I can ask, just does any member have any interest?
Through the Chair, no, I'm not declaring any interest, but as I stated yesterday at the Finance Committee, because of the considerable amount of volume of stuff that comes before us, there may be a point where I notice when I'm going through something that I might have an interest in it, and I will declare it at that point if that was the case.
Okay, can I just remind members that the rules governing the registration and declaration of interest are contained within the Code of Conduct and guides the rules relating to the conduct of members, and that further advice and guidance is available from the Clerk of Standards. So moving on to agenda item 7, staff contact details. Can I just advise members that contact details for the committee team are at page 54 of the meeting pack, and the committee team is based at room 371. So item 8, arrangements for committee meetings, and again if I can refer members to the paper at page 56 of the meeting pack, I advise that the committee will normally meet weekly on Thursdays at 10 AM in room 30 where we're at, and additional meetings will be scheduled as necessary. Are members content to note the arrangements? Okay, you have to say content now for me to know you're content. Number 9, the procedures and processes of the Winter Framework Democratic Scrutiny Committee. Remind members that the committee now needs to formally agree its processes and procedures, and if I can refer you to the Secretariat briefing paper at page 9 of the meeting pack. Just to let you know that we will seek agreement on the processes and procedures outlined in the table at pages 17 to 20 of the pack, and I'm going to ask the clerk just to go through this before we agree at all. Okay,
I'm going to deal with this section by section, divided up as it is in the table. So I'll read out all of the actions under a particular section, and the chairperson then will seek agreement at the end of each section. So to assist the committee in deciding whether to monitor proposed EU acts, that legal advice is requested, and that will be for proposed replacement acts only, using the template at Annex E, page 41 of the meeting pack, that an assessment of impact is requested via the Executive Office and via the departmental template for proposed new EU acts at Annex F, page 42 of the meeting pack, that an initial assessment of impact is requested via the Executive Office and via the departmental template for proposed replacement EU acts at Annex G, page 44 of the meeting pack, that the Department's assessments of impact are published on the committee webpage, that legal advisors attend the committee meeting in which the decision on whether to monitor an EU Act will be made and to provide the advice in closed session, that departmental officials attend the committee meeting at which the decision on whether to monitor the Act will be made and be prepared to come forward from the public gallery to answer members' questions or provide clarity if needed.
Okay, Joanne.
Chairman, just if I may, now that we're in public session, I think it's important to be on the record. If I could ask through you that Paul again would confirm the notion about dual divergence around this area, because the regulations do not specify that we would ask about not applying the procedure. So I think it's important that that's on record in the public session, what the issue is there and why we would ask for that.
Paul?
Yeah, I'm happy to come back then to the regulations. So the purpose and functions of the committee are set out in the pack that you have there in the regulations. So the purpose of the committee is to assist with the observation and implementation of Article 13.3a and Article 13.4 of the framework. And in order to fulfil its purpose, the functions of the committee include the examination and consideration of new EU acts and replacement EU acts. So it is open to the committee in looking at new EU acts or replacement EU acts to consider each of these elements in relation to it. It doesn't have to do that, but the scope is here within that power of the committee to allow it to not just consider whether the adoption of the Act might have a significant impact or whether it significantly differs, but also it would be open to the committee to consider what would be the implications of not adopting that Act. So it's entirely within the gift of the committee to decide to do that.
I suppose, Paul, what I'm looking for specifically is, in our pre-brief, you explained why that was important and the position that Northern Ireland could be left in, and I think it would be helpful if, again, you would put that on the record.
Yeah, happy to talk about that issue. So earlier on we talked about in circumstances where the break is applied, what that means in terms of the legal position, and you noted that the amended or replacement EU Act wouldn't then apply, but that the existing EU law would continue to apply. And we have discussed how then there's a potential in circumstances where the rest of the EU then follows a different law, but Northern Ireland is actually having to retain the previous EU law that nobody else actually has to abide with. And the other issue that we noted is the potential for GB to have diverged from that position as well. So there is, in theory, this potential, and academics have done quite a bit of work on it, for there to be dual divergence or trivergence, where Northern Ireland finds itself in a position where the regulations that apply here only apply here and neither apply in GB nor in the EU.
Thank you.
Sorry, through the chair. Sorry, just for clarification. So the concept of trivergence isn't actually covered in the legislation, is it?
It's not addressed in the legislation, no. This is work that academics have done on this since the regulations have been published, drawing attention to that.
So just again through the chair, we're being asked to do something that's not in the legislation, but it's by what is not yet practice.
No, sorry, I should make the distinction. What the committee's been asked to do is entirely consistent with what its role is set out in the regulations. What we're drawing to your attention is the potential for this issue to emerge of dual divergence or trivergence, and therefore giving you the option to gather the information that would inform any decision that you might take in order to anticipate where that might happen.
So, Chair, sorry to interrupt, but just for clarity, in that sort of scenario, it may be the case that we decide something does have significance or that it does significantly impact or change, but we decide to allow that to proceed and not to apply the break because the alternative would be worse and that we would be leaving ourselves behind almost.
Yeah, the point that we're making to the committee is that it's important that you have all this information, that you have the full picture about what are the consequences of any decision. Of course, when the committee publishes its report, as we talked about earlier, that doesn't prevent any group of 30 members from applying the break, nor does it compel 30 members to do it. So it'll be a position that will inform members as to whether or not they wish to apply the break. So really, I suppose what we're talking about is making sure that members are as well informed as possible about what the consequences of either decision might be.
Okay, can I ask before the clerk continues if members are content with the procedures as thus far?
Content.
Okay, thank you. Clerk, continue.
Okay, now move to...
Sorry, Chair, just subject to the caveats that we agreed earlier in the proceedings.
They'll be interjected as we keep coming along.
Okay, to assist the committee in monitoring proposed EU acts. These are ones that the committee has agreed to monitor. That the department is asked to inform the committee via the Executive Office if any changes have been made to an EU Act which alters the department's initial assessment of impact, and if so, to submit a revised assessment of impact. that the Department's revised assessments of impact are published on the committee webpage, and that the Assembly's Research and Information Service is asked to provide a quarterly status update on any proposed acts that the committee is monitoring, and inform the committee on an ongoing basis if there are any updates of note, which addresses the amendment that you had requested.
Also, the previous one that I had requested was around any other matters. I think it's important on that basis that we are receiving evidence and not commentary. So I think that we need to be clear with departments that that's what we're requesting.
Okay. So to assist the committee in deciding whether to hold an inquiry or continue an inquiry, that legal advice is requested using the template already considered at Annex E, page 41 of the pack, that legal advisors attend the committee meeting at which the decision will be made and provide advice in closed session, that an initial assessment of impact is requested via the Executive Office and via the departmental template for published replacement EU Acts at Annex H, page 46 of the pack, that departmental officials attend the committee meeting at which the decision will be made and be prepared to come forward from the public gallery to answer members' questions, provide clarity if needed, and that Assembly Research and Information Service is asked to identify a short, focused list of key representatives of businesses and civil society that the committee should seek to engage with via citizen space.
Okay, are members content?
Yeah, Chair, just for purposes of clarification again, and it relates to the previous point about the quarterly status update. So the amendment to that would be that in circumstances where any significant update arises, the committee will be notified in advance. Yeah, it'll continue to be monitored, and that all of these procedures are subject to review as we progress.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, in relation to the committee's statutory duties in carrying out inquiries, that the relevant UK Minister is asked to provide views on the EU Act and respond to any other issues the committee wishes to raise, that departmental officials are asked to attend a committee meeting to formally brief members on the EU Act, that wider engagement with businesses and civil society is sought via citizen space as part of any inquiry, that the committee's decision on whether to hold or continue an inquiry is published on the committee webpage by the end of the next working day, including where a decision has not been taken, and that the decision should state that the committee has decided not to or to conduct an inquiry into the Replacement Act pursuant to paragraph 8.1 of the Windsor Framework Democratic Scrutiny Regulations 2024.
Okay, are members agreed?
Content.
Okay, thank you. So, as members will be aware, proposals for EU Acts have been published prior to the establishment of this committee and will therefore not have been notified to the committee. Can I seek agreement to ask the Executive Office to attend a future committee meeting to provide an overview briefing of what proposed EU legislation relevant to the North is currently progressing through the EU legislative system?
Agreed.
Okay.
Again, sorry, through the Chair. It could be useful if members of the committee were given an update on what those likely acts are to be as well, so that we've got those just before we get the brief.
Okay,
that will be included in your papers for that particular meeting.
But I'm saying behind it, if it's already happened, we as members of the committee should know now that these are the kind of things that are coming along. So I'd rather have that information made available now. If we have it, we should be having it now. Committee's up and running.
Have you any idea of the timescale of when we will be inviting the Executive Office to
I would imagine that they would be able to brief us within the next 2-3 weeks on that.
So it'll be in our...
I would suggest, I would quite like to have that information now.
Okay, well I can request that information from the Executive Office, and if it is available, we can provide it to you.
Available, we're in trouble.
Okay, so I want to inform members that all processes and procedures agreed will be reviewed on an ongoing basis.
10.
Okay, so moving on then to item number 10, draft correspondence from the Democratic Scrutiny Committee to the First Minister and Deputy First Minister and Executive Ministers. So I just want to refer members to a draft letter to the First and Deputy First Ministers and other Executive Ministers, and it's at page 59 of the meeting pack. This letter sets out the committee's functions and provides ministers with information on how the committee has agreed to carry out its business. Can I propose just at the end of the first full paragraph on page 62 which addresses the need for departments to have assessments of impact ready at the time of request, that we put this in bold font just to highlight the fact that the committee is under very tight time pressures.
Agreed.
Okay. So has everybody then agreed that we issue the letter and publish it on the committee webpage?
Sorry, Chair. Sorry, go ahead, John.
No, it's fine.
No, sorry, Chair. Bearing in mind sort of the importance also of UK ministers doing what they're doing as well, and the fact that it's important, I think, as many people are aware of this as possible. Can we info this letter to the to both the Secretary of State to Northern Ireland and particularly to the importance of the Cabinet Office, to the Prime Minister's office as well?
You're talking about CC in those, aren't you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. In bold, underlined.
Okay.
Sure.
Yes.
Just if I may, can we include in the letter the issue that we've raised before with regard to any other matters that we should be aiming for evidence, not commentary? Thank you.
Okay. Moving on then to item 11, draft correspondence from the committee to MLA. So it's similar. It's on page 65 of the meeting pack, and it's a similar letter to the one that we've just talked about. So can I seek agreement that this letter be issued to all MLAs and again published on the committee webpage?
Sure, just I suppose probably goes back to the earlier point that was on the record regarding not applying, and it's specifically referenced in both the letter to OFM, DFM and the MLAs. Do we perhaps need further commentary around that as to what we actually mean by that, as was discussed earlier in the committee through Paul?
I'm not sure.
So obviously we talked around, so obviously it's not specifically mandated within the regulations that we have to look at not applying the EU law as such and the consequences. We've had an explanation.
So it's explaining the rationale as to why we're asking
we've had
for
an
the
explanation,
impact
but it's
of
not
not
actually
applying.
included in the letter to both the OFM, DFM and the other MLAs that were in the pack to be agreed.
I mean, the letter can be amended to say that
I think it's just important for clarity.
it's not, you know, in the regulations as such, but it does fall within that wider observation and implementation.
I think the issue is to explain why we're asking for that when it's not contained, because I think once people understand the impact, then they'll understand why we're seeking that information.
About the dual or trivergence.
Yes.
So no difficulty clarifying that letter then, just to set out the principle, I suppose, that we were talking about earlier. Essentially what the committee wants is the widest range of information in order to fully understand what are the implications of either pulling the brake or not pulling the brake. Okay.
Are people content with that being contained in the letter?
And maybe somebody could explain what trivergence is, actually lay it out. I think might be useful, because I'm sorry, through the chair, we need to be serious about this. We have now identified already, because it's not in the legislation, we are looking at sort of wider aspects of this. We need to actually define quite clearly what the concept of trivergence means, because as has already been pointed out by Emma, there might be cases where we might decide that it is potentially a breach, but because of the impact that it's likely to be, we decide not to action on it, or we might do exactly the opposite. I think it's really important because, you know, I will not discuss the previous advice that we have had from legal, because obviously it's privileged, but the reality is we do not want to be setting ourselves up for a JR before we've even started. So we need to have what a description of this divergence process is, and because it's not specifically laid out in the Acts or in the agreement, we need to be very clear about this.
Okay. Right.
I mean, so that's my opinion. Anybody else can sort of come in, but I just sense that right from this beginning point, we need to get this one right.
I mean, I think it's important to point out that what we will be doing will be based on the evidence that we get, both from the departments and the legal opinion. You know, we're not renegotiating any agreements per se. We're making a report or carrying out an inquiry based on the evidence that we get. You know, and we need to get the fullest of evidence. So, I mean, I think that's satisfactory. Patrick?
Chair, I do agree with Steve's point on this. I mean, we are, as I am understanding it, to a degree in uncharted territory here. I mean, I'm not sure if there are other regions or areas that are subject to a similar issue of divergence, but you did make reference at the start to academics who have identified this issue. So could it be a function of this committee to invite some of those academics into a meeting of this committee to discuss the issue with them, to try and get a better understanding?
Okay.
I'm sure Katie would be delighted to come and give us
yes,
a
I thought it might have been. Yeah.
Is that something we can look at, Claire?
We can identify those academics. I mean, I think it's been written about quite extensively. Yeah. So we can identify them and seek formal agreement at next week's meeting to invite those identified.
Joanne, were you looking at?
Chair, I just want to confirm a couple of things. In circumstances where my tablet is just shutting down now, oh, here we go. Of course it is. Just want to clarify, in circumstances where the break is successfully pulled, that you know, in the example of trivergence, but in circumstances where the break is successfully pulled, at that point then surely the UK government or the NI Assembly can legislate to make sure that everything is fine. In Northern Ireland that's the case, isn't it?
I'm not sure I follow entirely. So in instances where the 30 members have pulled the brake, the UK government is satisfied that all the conditions have been met. In the joint committee then they've notified the EU, and at that stage we've noticed then that the law wouldn't have effect, but it would go on then to be treated as if it were a new law. So we note then that the whole issue of applicability motions would come in, and the Assembly would be asked to agree with cross-community support. Then following that, if there wasn't cross-community support, we've noticed the exceptional circumstances in which the UK government could decide to add it to the framework anyway. But we've noticed that if they didn't add it in the framework, the EU may take remedial measures. So if all of those things had happened, is your question then, where would that leave the Assembly?
I suppose my question is, with regard to the impact of not, whenever we're looking at the issue of the impact of not applying EU law, so presumably in those circumstances then the brake would be successfully pulled, but in those circumstances where we are neither with the UK or with the EU at that juncture, and there's a gap, the UK government or the Assembly can legislate accordingly.
Well,
so that there is no gap.
So the law, the existing law within the Windsor framework would continue to apply, okay, and the Assembly wouldn't be within the competence of the Assembly to legislate in a way that was inconsistent with the laws that are set out in the Windsor framework. Those laws, as I say, are changed as a result of what the Joint Committee agree. Yes. And the Assembly would have the ability through an applicability motion to agree that those laws should be changed, and that the UK government then would be obliged within the Joint Committee. Yeah. So that's the mechanism after the brake has been pulled. If the Assembly says, actually, the brake has been pulled, but we do want this law to apply, the applicability motion gives the Assembly the opportunity to direct the UK government to agree within the Joint Committee that it should be added.
Just before we move on to the next item, the other thing that I did want to check, within the papers, I'm certain that I read somewhere that we would have access to the same papers as Parliament.
Yes.
Yes.
The Secretary of State set out that commitment that this committee would have that same information.
Lovely, thank you.
Okay. So moving on to item 12, which is further committee procedures. Can I just advise members that standard guidance papers in relation to committee procedures are included as follows. Point 12.1, a guide to the powers and operation of standing and ad hoc committee and chairpersons and members, and that's at page 71. Are members content to note? Point 12.2, a guide to the role of chairperson, is at page 28. Are members content to note? 12.3, a guide for members on the role and functions of the committee secretariat, at page 109. Are members content to note this? Okay, item 13, committee protocols. Advise members that papers on committee protocols are included as follows. 13.1, a sample committee protocol on conduct and courtesy at meetings, that's at page 114, and this outlines the standard approach to how meetings are conducted. Members content to adopt this protocol? 13.2, the draft committee approach to dealing with correspondence and requests for meetings is at page 115. And this has the statutory functions of this committee relate to the examination and consideration of new EU acts and replacement EU acts. The proposed approach to dealing with the correspondence and requests for meetings reflects the committee's functions. So are members content to adopt this as outlined? 13.3 then is the draft committee approach to meeting preparation and witness questioning, and that's at page 117. Are members content to adopt the approach to questioning as outlined? Okay.
Right.
13.4, can I just alert members that, as the case for all committees, an account has been set up on X or Twitter, whatever way you call it. And the purpose of this is to promote the work of the committee and to provide general information on meeting times, agendas, etc. Are members content that this account be used?
What's our X handle?
Sorry?
What's our X handle?
I'll email you details.
Okay, we'll all be informed of it and added to it. So item number 14, correspondence, and there are no items for correspondence. And item number 15 then, any other business? Okay, very quickly. Item number 16, date, time and place of next meeting. So just as we've already agreed, the next meeting of the committee has been scheduled for Thursday the 22nd of February 2024, 10 AM in room 30 where we're at. Okay, happy enough? Okay, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you all.
At a time.
Okay, so can I ask the committee secretariat just to close the meeting?
Committee Room 30, sound.